Carl Jung called it the shadow, the psychological war happening inside every person who has ever stood one decision away from changing their life, and then didn't move. Not because the talent wasn't there, not because the opportunity wasn't real, but because something deep in the architecture of their own mind pulled the emergency brake at the exact moment of breakthrough. Today, we go inside that mechanism. We cover why you destroy your own momentum right when it matters most, why a part of you is genuinely hooked on your own suffering, how to turn the darkest corners of your psychology into fuel instead of letting them run you, how to kill the one mental habit keeping you permanently stuck, and the exact protocol used by some of history's most disciplined minds to win the internal war before the rest of the world even wakes up. To do it, we pull from Steven Pressfield's War of Art, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, Carl Jung's collected works including Aeon, Nietzsche's Philosophy of Self-Overcoming, Robert Greene's Laws of Human Nature, David Goggins, Marcus Aurelius, and peer-reviewed neuroscience. None of this is motivational decoration. All of it is real. And by the end of this video, you will understand yourself in a way most people spend entire lifetimes running from. Part 1. The enemy isn't out there. Most people have spent years building a detailed case for why they haven't arrived yet, cataloging the economy, the upbringing, the timing, the people who didn't believe in them, the breaks that never showed up, and some of those things may carry real weight. But the research keeps pointing at the same destination. The primary obstacle to your evolution doesn't live in your circumstances, it lives inside you. And unlike your circumstances, it is active, intelligent, and specifically targeting the things that matter most to you. Steven Pressfield spent decades studying this force and gave it a name: resistance. His definition cuts clean. Most of us have two lives, the life we live and the unlived life within us. Between the two stands resistance. Resistance isn't laziness, and it isn't ordinary fear. It operates with a single purpose, which is to keep everything exactly as it is, and it will deploy whatever tool gets the job done. Procrastination, distraction, rationalization, manufactured anxiety, sudden illness, the sudden overwhelming need to reorganize your desk instead of doing the work. Pressfield's compass principle makes it stranger still. The more important something is to your growth, the harder resistance pushes back against it. The size of what you're afraid to do is a direct measurement of how much it matters. Most people read that fear as a stop sign. It's actually a direction. But the sharpest edge of Pressfield's observation is this: resistance hits hardest at the finish line, not at the start when energy is high, not in the middle where struggle is expected, but at the end when 90% of the work is already done and breakthrough is one push away. That is precisely when the old internal program panics, because that is when the unlived life is closest to becoming the real one. On the night of March 27, 2022, Will Smith made this visible on the largest stage in entertainment. 30 years of construction sat behind that evening. The Fresh Prince era, the blockbusters, the reinventions, the deliberate cultivation of a persona he described in his own words as wanting to walk into any room and make friends as quickly as possible. 3 decades of presenting a version of himself that was managed, inoffensive, universally accepted, and on the night that effort finally produced the Best Actor Oscar, the finish line he'd been chasing for his entire adult life, he walked onto that stage and slapped the host in front of 15 million people. The Oscar arrived in one hand and the implosion arrived in the other. In the same hour, the foundation he and his wife had built over 28 years saw donations collapse 83%, dropping from $2,138,000 in 2021 to $365,000 in 2022. The $120 million film he released that same year earned $3,000 to $4,000 per location on its opening weekend. The corporate relationships dissolved, the invitations dried up. Pressfield's warning was precise. The danger is greatest when the finish line is in sight. What detonated Will Smith's career that night wasn't a moment of passion. It was a weapon that had been loading for 3 decades, and we'll come back to exactly what that weapon was, because psychology gave it a name long before Hollywood ever met it. Part 2. Your brain is not trying to help you. The assumption most people carry about self-sabotage is that it's a character flaw, something that separates the disciplined from the weak, the winners from the people who almost made it. The research dismantles that cleanly. Psychologist Gay Hendricks documented what he called the upper limit problem. After years studying high performers who destroyed their own momentum, and his description of the mechanism is worth quoting directly. Each of us has an inner thermostat setting that determines how much love, success, and creativity we allow ourselves to enjoy. When we exceed our inner thermostat setting, we will often do something to sabotage ourselves, causing us to drop back into the familiar zone where we feel secure. Unfortunately, our thermostat setting usually gets programmed in early childhood before we can think for ourselves. The thermostat was calibrated before you had any say in the matter. The neuroscience behind it runs through the amygdala, the brain's threat detection system, which cannot distinguish between a physical predator and the terror of being seen at your full capacity. When the prospect of genuine success appears, the amygdala signals cortisol release and triggers the same fight or flight response it would generate for a charging animal. And in the context of your own ambitions, that response comes out as avoidance, procrastination, and the behaviors that ensure you fall short, because falling short eliminates the threat. The threat in every case of self-sabotage is the breakthrough itself. Mike Tyson became the youngest heavyweight champion in boxing history on November 22, 1986, claiming the title at 20 years old, shaped by a childhood that by any clinical measure should have produced a statistic rather than a champion. Trainer Cus D'Amato steadied him long enough to reach the pinnacle, and then D'Amato died before Tyson got there, leaving him with the crown and no architecture for what came next. At the absolute peak of his power, the pattern Hendricks described played out exactly as documented. Tyson described it himself with the kind of directness that no therapist could have scripted. I would look to sabotage something because it was going so good. When things go so good like that, normally my old self would sabotage it. His internal thermostat was calibrated to survival and struggle, not dominance and stability. And when reality outran the setting, the correction mechanism engaged. That isn't weakness. That's a survival system running outdated software at full speed, and it will keep running it until you consciously overwrite it through neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through conscious practice. Part 3. The addiction to your own suffering. Here is what makes this harder than it looks. Part of you doesn't want to get better, not because you're weak, but because your suffering has become your identity. And identity is the most powerful operating system in human psychology. Dr. Anna Lemke, medical director of addiction medicine at Stanford University, documented one of the more unsettling findings in modern neuroscience. The same brain regions that process pleasure also process pain, operating like a scale. When dopamine tips the scale toward pleasure, the brain immediately compensates by pushing an equal amount of weight to the pain side, restoring balance. The high is always followed by the low. Relief always becomes need. What most people miss is the reverse. Press deliberately on the pain side of that scale. Choose difficulty intentionally. Schedule suffering into your days, and the brain compensates in the other direction. generating genuine pleasure over time and resetting your baseline capacity for enjoyment upward. Lemke's research also found something that reframes addiction entirely. Patients who struggled with substance abuse believed their addictions were a response to depression and anxiety, but the behavior itself was generating the suffering it claimed to treat. The escape route was building the prison. Kanye West's trajectory makes this visible at scale. At his creative peak, the work spoke for itself. The beats, the albums, the provocations were all outputs of someone who had found a way to convert darkness into art. When his mother died in 2007, he said openly that he spent years unable to speak about her without breaking down, and that unprocessed grief, combined with the pressure of global celebrity, became a charge building without a release valve. What followed wasn't failure, it was substitution. The creative output that had been metabolizing the darkness gave way to grievance narratives, public eruptions, declarations of persecution, and wars with corporations and collaborators. Forbes confirmed that following his 2022 public statements, his billionaire status was gone. Adidas terminated the partnership. Apple Music, Peloton, and Skechers followed. The infrastructure he had spent decades building dissolved around him. Friedrich Nietzsche named this mechanism 140 years before any of it happened. He called it resentment, the psychology of a will to power so suppressed or shattered that it turns inward, expressing itself not through action, but through passive resentment, grievance cultivation, and the construction of elaborate explanations for why movement is impossible. Every one of those explanations generates a small neurochemical reward. Every rehearsed grievance feels like a kind of truth, and every one of them keeps you perfectly still. Kanye's arc isn't a moral story. It's a case study in what happens when the channel that was sublimating dark energy closes and nothing replaces it, and the darkness that was once fuel starts running the machine instead. Nietzsche's prescription was amor fati, the love of fate, not as resignation but as an active embrace of everything life delivers, including the struggle, as necessary material for becoming more than you currently are. He called it the formula for greatness. But before you can love your fate, you have to face what you've been running from, and that requires confronting the concept that almost every self-help conversation gets wrong. Part 4. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is your ammunition. Carl Jung was born in 1875 in Switzerland, and after years of collaboration with Sigmund Freud, he built his own complete theory of the psyche, one that moved beyond Freud's ego, id, and superego model to produce a concept so widely cited and so consistently misunderstood that most people who invoke it have never read the original. The shadow is not your evil side. Jung defined it as the unconscious portion of the personality that doesn't match the ego ideal. Everything about yourself that you decided was unacceptable, dangerous, too much, not enough, or simply incompatible with the version of you that others could tolerate. Whatever got repressed didn't disappear. It concentrated, gained charge, and started looking for exits. His actual words on this: everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. What almost no one in the popularized shadow conversation acknowledges is what Jung wrote in Ion about the shadow's contents. It doesn't consist only of reprehensible tendencies. Normal instincts live there, realistic insights live there, creative impulses live there, and the raw instinctual drives for aggression, power, and sexuality live there. Carrying enormous amounts of energy, become aware of those drives, sublimate them, put them in service of something larger, and they become the engine. Leave them unexamined, and they become the wreckage. Tiger Woods built the most precisely maintained public persona in professional sports history. and by 2009, earnings for the year exceeded $120 million, while his career total had already crossed $1 billion, making him the first professional athlete in history to reach that milestone. He had held the world #1 ranking for 281 consecutive weeks, a record built on total control, immaculate discipline, and the appearance of a man who had unified every part of himself toward a single purpose. The control wasn't integration, it was suppression. And behind the image ran two completely separate lives: the global icon, the husband, the father, the brand, and a hidden parallel existence conducted through burner phones and maintained by enablers, kept entirely apart from everything the public knew. Jung's observation applies with mechanical precision. When an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Thanksgiving night 2009, the two lives collided in a driveway at 2:30 in the morning, and what followed wasn't recklessness. It was the mathematical outcome of long-term suppression at maximum pressure. The shadow didn't leak, it detonated. Sponsors departed. The 281-week ranking collapsed. The marriage ended. Psychologists studying the case noted that the same psychological isolation that powered his competitive dominance left him completely exposed once the structure failed, because the walls that compressed the shadow also locked out everything that might have helped him carry it. Robert Greene, synthesizing Jung with decades of historical case studies in laws of human nature, made the consequence explicit. Denial and concealment of the shadow produces depression, anxiety, and inauthentic living. The integration of the dark side, treating it as fuel rather than contamination, is what distinguishes people operating at their real capacity from people perpetually wondering why they can't reach it. Jung also documented what he called the golden shadow. The positive qualities buried not because they were dark, but because they were too bright. The ambitions that got called selfish, the talents that got called arrogant, the hunger that got called unrealistic. Those live in the shadow alongside everything else, and they're waiting too. His estimate of how many people complete the integration process is worth sitting with. Developmental research following Jung's framework puts that number at less than 5%. The rest spend their lives projecting, seeing in other people the qualities they can't acknowledge in themselves, and watching their circumstances deliver the same outcomes on rotation. Now return to Mike Tyson, because his story doesn't end in prison. That's where it starts over. During his incarceration in the early 1990s, Tyson began confronting the shadow without having the clinical language for it, visualizing his anger not as an enemy to destroy, but as a part of himself requiring expression to achieve balance, journaling his darkest thoughts without judgment, reading philosophy and history in a cell. Before fights, he would describe something that sounds, from the outside, like a man deliberately crossing into another psychological state. I always cry before I fight. This is who I am. I'm getting ready to change into somebody I don't like. That emerging somebody brings more than just fighting with him. He brought jealousy, envy, guilt. He brought a lot of stuff. The darkness wasn't suppressed before he walked into the ring. It was conscripted, given a job, and put on a timer. David Goggins built the same architecture through a different route, the accountability mirror, writing his weaknesses on a physical mirror and confronting them every morning, not as an exercise in shame, but as a method of recruitment. Goggins completed training as a Navy SEAL, Army Ranger, and Air Force Tactical Air Controller, and set the Guinness World Record for pull-ups at 4,030 in 17 hours. Shadow work, just without the therapeutic vocabulary. Part 5. The Hope Addiction and How to Destroy It. Viktor Frankl was an Austrian psychiatrist born in 1905, and in 1942, The Nazis sent him and his family to Theresienstadt, where his father died 2 years later. The surviving family members were transported to Auschwitz, where his mother was killed. His wife died later at Bergen-Belsen. Frankl survived 4 camps and came out with one of the most rigorously tested psychological frameworks ever produced. What he observed about hope in the camps doesn't match the version most people expect. The prisoners who didn't survive were frequently not the physically weakest. They were the ones who had attached their survival to a specific external condition. I will be free by Christmas. And when Christmas passed without liberation, the will collapsed with the hope. Frankl put it plainly, once a prisoner loses hope in the future, he is doomed. The mechanism that destroyed them wasn't the absence of hope. It was hope treated as a passive contract with external circumstances, a substitution of waiting for acting, of wishing for moving. The prisoners who lived found not a hope, but a why, a reason that existed independently of the conditions, a meaning that the guards couldn't confiscate. Frankl's logotherapy built from this. The primary driver of neurotic behavior is the inability to find meaning, not the absence of pleasure or safety or comfort, but meaning. 3 paths lead to it: completing work that matters, connecting genuinely with others, and choosing a transformative attitude toward unavoidable suffering. That third path is the one most people skip, because it requires admitting that the suffering isn't going to be rescued away. It's going to be metabolized, or it's going to metastasize. Both Kanye West and Will Smith, beneath the very different shapes of their public implosions, shared the same structural flaw. Each had spent decades performing a version of himself that wasn't the complete truth, banking on the hope that if the performance held tightly enough, the interior war would eventually quiet down. The rage Smith had compressed behind 30 years of carefully constructed likability chose the most consequential moment available to present itself, March 27, 2022, because that is what banked shadow energy reliably does. It waits for the highest stakes. Frankl's conclusion from the camps carries the weight of the conditions that produced it. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Not wealth, not safety, not the outcome, the response. If that held in Auschwitz, it holds in your circumstances. Nietzsche's resentment is the direct opposite of that freedom, the construction of narratives about why movement is impossible, why suffering belongs to someone else's fault, why waiting is rational. Every grievance narrative delivers a neurochemical reward. Every rehearsal of victimhood feels like a kind of validation, and every one of them keeps you exactly where you are, feeding the passive hope that something external will eventually resolve what only internal action can address. The exit isn't killing hope. The exit is making hope conditional on effort, attaching it not to outcomes you can't control, but to the actions you can take today, making the operative question not when will things improve, but what will I do today that my future self will be grateful for. That is Frankl's radical responsibility made into daily practice. That is Nietzsche's amor fati made operational, and it has to start every morning, because the war resets every morning. Part 6. The Anti-Self, the Morning Protocol. Marcus Aurelius served as Emperor of Rome from 161 to 180 AD, commanding armies, governing millions, and presiding over plague and constant warfare at the peak of imperial power. Every morning, he fought the same battle you fight, and the record he kept of that fight was never meant to be read by anyone other than himself. Meditations carries the original Greek title, ta eis heaton, which translates to things unto himself, a private war journal kept for 20 years by a man who used Stoic philosophy as a daily weapon against his own weakness. His entry from Book 5 gets quoted less than it deserves. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do? Or is this what I was created for? To huddle under the blankets and stay warm? The most powerful man in the world was writing himself instructions for getting out of bed, which means the war doesn't get easier with success. It doesn't quiet with power, and the morning is always where it begins again. The question is always the same. Which version of you shows up first? Tyson's version of that question played out in dressing rooms before fights, conscripting jealousy and guilt and envy into something that could walk into a ring and dominate. A deliberate, if intuitive, choice to put darkness to work rather than let it run loose. Frankel's last human freedom applied to a boxing context. Goggins built his morning practice around the 40% rule, grounded in Dr. Tim Noakes' central governor theory, which proposes that the brain generates sensations of exhaustion to protect the body long before physical failure actually occurs. When you feel you've hit your limit, you've used roughly 40% of your actual capacity, and the wall you're standing against isn't the end of your ability, but a test of whether you're running the old software or the new one. Jung's contribution to the morning is the least discussed and most necessary part of this entire protocol. The accountability mirror practice, confronting daily what you're suppressing, what you're projecting, what excuse you're currently running, isn't comfortable, but the cost of skipping it is documented in 4 public careers. A man who is possessed by his shadow is always standing in his own light and falling into his own traps, living below his own level. Tiger Woods lived below his own level, not below his golf game, but below his actual self, and the suppression that kept the surface immaculate was costing him everything underneath it. Will Smith lived below his own level for 3 decades, performing approachability while the banked rage was waiting for its moment. Kanye lived below his own level the day the creative work stopped and the grievance narratives moved in to fill the space that sublimation had been occupying. Tyson, in a prison cell with no title and no money and no status, chose differently. He confronted the mirror and started writing. And years later, performing his one-man show, where he stood on a stage and told the complete truth about himself, he described it as therapy. I had to face all those parts of me that I didn't want anyone to see. In recent interviews, well into his 50s, he put the whole arc into a single sentence. I understand my triggers and why I self-sabotage. That sentence contains the entire script. It's what Aurelius was building in those private journals. It's what Frankl extracted from 4 concentration camps. It's what Jung spent a career mapping. It's what Pressfield turned into a compass. Understanding your triggers and why you self-sabotage is the whole game. So here is what the anti-self morning protocol looks like when you pull it from everything covered today. Name resistance before you negotiate with it. The pull of the blanket, the impulse to check your phone, the case your brain is making for a recovery day. All of that gets named before it gets acted on. This is resistance. It's pointing at what matters, and you're moving toward what it's pointing at. Confront the shadow before it ambushes you later. The anger, the fear, the ambition, the dark drive you're pretending doesn't exist. It exists, and if you don't consciously recruit it today, it will work against you unconsciously, on its own schedule, at the worst possible moment. Tiger's shadow chose Thanksgiving night 2009. Will Smith's shadow chose Oscar night 2022. Tyson chose differently, and the difference wasn't the darkness he was carrying. The difference was the choice he made about what to do with it. Choose meaning over comfort, not because comfort is the enemy, but because comfort is what resistance offers as a substitute for your actual life. And Frankl's camps established that meaning is available in any circumstances if you're willing to choose it, rather than wait for it to arrive. Press deliberately on the pain side of the balance. Schedule difficulty. Lemke's neuroscience is clear. The intentional choice of discomfort resets the pleasure-pain scale toward genuine pleasure over time. The days you choose the harder thing are the days you're building the version of yourself that won't need to sabotage what it builds. Cast one vote, a single specific action toward the person you're constructing. As James Clear establishes in Atomic Habits, identity isn't declared, it accumulates from choices made daily, each one a vote for who you're becoming, and every morning the anti-self wins that vote. The shift deepens. The war. Two lives exist inside you, the one you're living and the one you haven't allowed yourself to reach yet. Between them stands everything we covered today. Resistance that sharpens right at the finish line, a thermostat calibrated to a version of you that no longer exists, the dopamine mechanics of passive hope that deliver comfort and produce stagnation, a shadow that compresses and concentrates until it finds its own exit on its own timeline, the resentment you've been feeding one grievance at a time, and the morning battle you've been losing by default. Will Smith claimed his Oscar and lost his career in the same hour because the shadow never got integrated. Tiger Woods held the #1 ranking for 281 consecutive weeks, while a billion-dollar career sat waiting to detonate, because what goes unexamined doesn't stay internal, it happens outside as fate. Kanye West traded the most generative shadow energy in a generation of music for projection and grievance the moment the creative channel shut down, and Mike Tyson, carrying every reason to let the darkness win, found a cell and a mirror and a decision, and came back. The difference between those four stories isn't talent. It isn't circumstance. It comes down to one choice, made daily, usually in the first 30 seconds after waking up. The choice to be the person who faces the shadow, or the person the shadow runs instead. Pressfield established that resistance is self-generated and self-perpetuated, the enemy within. And that is the difficult news. The good news, the news Viktor Frankl carried out of Auschwitz, is that what is self-generated can be self-addressed. The last human freedom cannot be taken from you. It can only be surrendered. Marcus Aurelius fought this same battle every morning for 20 years from the most powerful seat in the ancient world, and he never permanently solved it. He just won it more mornings than he lost. Nietzsche gave us the engine underneath all of it. Every living thing does everything it can, not to preserve itself, but to become more. Not to survive, to become more. The shadow is not your enemy. The suffering you've been attached to is not your identity. The resistance pointing at the thing you're most afraid to do is not a wall. It is the most precise compass you will ever have access to. You versus you. Win this battle, and you win your life.